For this time. Thank you so much for letting me speak for a little bit about our experience, which is not terribly remarkable, I am afraid, but that also might be the good news. At Beacon, we started conversations about the eighth principle in the fall of 2019. In part led because of our interactions with Paula. And thank you so much, Paula, for the leadership and guidance you provided our congregation on a whole host of things. And at one point in our conversations, I think it was with the Board of Trustees, you mentioned the eighth principle, or it came up in conversation. And what you may not know is after that meeting, it kept coming up. So Reverend John, I couldn't agree more that this wasn't led by me. It wasn't led by my colleague and co-minister, Reverend Emily, or Dr. Tooley, who is the executive director. It really was this sense among the leadership that kept bringing up the conversation. What is the eighth principle? We want to learn more. Where are we in process with the eighth principle as a denomination? And then as it became, as there was this realization, oh, as a congregation, we could pass the eighth principle. As that awareness began to move in the life of the congregation, then there was really a concerted effort that was largely led by lay leaders, not by us religious professionals. A couple of notes in the timeline that may be helpful to you. So that initial conversation started, I think it was October or November of 2019. We have a group that meets every month of our leaders. It's mostly for pastoral support, but the eighth principle came up in the December meeting. And there was enough interest generated that we decided to all go under, begin a process of education just amongst the leader group. It's a pretty large group. Our congregation is almost 500 members. So that leader group is about 40 folks. So we had a pretty core group of, strong interest that educated themselves, explored what this would mean. It felt like after decades of work around dismantling racism and then understanding what anti-racism means and multiculturalism would mean, the eighth principle felt like a theological grounding and a space to deepen our theological work around this and our spiritual work. And that, I think, was really enlivening and life-giving, talking about life, to many of our leaders. So from that process, we then determined it's time to share the good news of the eighth principle with the congregation. So we did have 2 Sunday services that focused on the eighth principle, one that I led and one that Reverend Emily led, Emily Bogus. From there, we started to float the idea in the congregation about having a formal vote on the eighth principle. The primary concern that we heard come up amongst our congregation was, if we pass it as a congregation, is this somehow disrupting the process that the denomination is going through? We actually didn't hear too many concerns about the eighth principle itself. Folks felt that in the constellation of the principles, that it was an important addition. In fact, a vital addition. The resources, Bruce and Paula, that are available in terms of the history of how this was put together were of immeasurable assistance to us. I mean, it made it so simple for us to have the 2 educational sessions we had. And we also did like a small breakout group on a Sunday for folks to ask questions. And it really allowed us to just create some, very straightforward FAQs for folks, as well as facilitation packets for the facilitators to use. The other thing we did is we have theme-based ministry. So we have community groups, that's our language around them, that meet monthly. Some of them meet twice a month. And we incorporated the eighth principle in one of their sessions. And we have a pretty high percentage of the congregation, about 25% of our membership is engaged in a community group. So that meant that in addition to these large Sunday sessions, it was being woven through our small group ministry. It also meant that by the time we got to the vote, which was at the end of June. We moved our annual meeting because, 2020, we were in the pandemic and there were all sorts of excruciatingly not interesting to me, but to others, bylaw checks around if we could do a meeting virtually. And so our meeting was at the end of June, which was also interesting because of the timing of General Assembly and all the things that we were exploring. But we did take the vote and we passed it in the last Sunday in June. What has been surprising to me is the sense of call and command that the congregation experienced after passing the eighth principle. So that was really quite surprising. We had a group that was working on a congregational covenant, and they really said, as the eighth principle started emerging, we're going to pause our work. Let's pass the eighth principle. And then we really think we need to look at this covenant in light of the eighth principle. And they completely changed the covenant.
Wow.
The covenant clearly states commitment to anti-racism, clearly names behaviors through the lens of anti-racism. And they also took the draft of the Covenant Task Force, and brought it to our Black, Indigenous, and People of Color group and said, give us any feedback, change the whole thing, throw it out. Like, we want to center those who most are harmed often by breaks in this covenant and by a need to re-covenant. And it really was a transformative process. We also took it to other marginalized groups within the congregation. Paula actually helped us identify how we were marginalizing our elders. And that has been an important ministry and work to be doing. So we have now also passed a congregational covenant. We called a special meeting in the fall to do that. That work was more challenging, because now people were having to, we as a congregation were having to look at internal behaviors. And yet I think what held us through that was the call and command of the eighth principle.
Yes.
I really do believe that if we had tried to do the covenant without the eighth principle, we would not have been able to do it. We are now in the congregation in the process of a listening tour, which we are utilizing some work that we did with Julica Herman de la Fuente. I almost want to say Reverend every time I say Julica's name. That's why I paused. Yeah, so I see some affirmation. Yeah, I know. And really looking at where structural racism is manifest in the system of the congregation, and looking at all aspects of our governance, of our ministry, and places where power is either held or distributed, shared or not shared. So those are some of the concrete outcomes that I can directly tie to the eighth principle. But I will tell you, there is not a meeting that I go into of lately, from the board to even a small group, where there isn't discussion about, well, how does the eighth principle inform what we're doing here? What about our covenant? I'm watching leaders able to call one another back into covenant with a spiritual maturity and a groundedness and a theological understanding that is really quite moving.